What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Welcome into Four Verts. My name is Harrison Graham. Got a couple of NFL rumors, headlines, a couple quarterbacks that are in the spotlight right now as we are just under a month away from the NFL draft. So we're going to dive into that and try to figure out where these two players are going to end up. So stay tuned. We'll get to that in just a second. You may not know this. We have an Instagram page for Four Verts. It's just at Four Verts IG. Looking to post more content over there, so give us a follow. We're closing in, I think, on 500 followers, so give us a follow over there. I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, I want to talk about Shedeur Sanders because with Russell Wilson going to the Giants, there's a lot of speculation on where the hell does Shedeur Sanders end up. We're pretty confident Cam Ward's going to go number 1 to the Titans. The Browns picking it 2. Seems like there's a lot of momentum to Abdul Carter there. Do the Giants still take him after signing Russ and Jameis Winston? You look at the draft order, and if they don't, if he gets past number 3, where does he go? The Patriots aren't taking him. The Jags aren't taking him. I don't think the Raiders will take him. They certainly could. The Jets could, but I don't think they would. Carolina's not taking him. And then you have the New Orleans Saints. You get past those top 3 teams, it's very hard to figure out where Shedeur goes. Again, there's a couple of maybes in there. The Saints certainly aren't a surefire thing, but I do wonder if they are the team that could make a lot of sense for Shedeur and from their standpoint as well for this year and beyond. So let's just go over a few reasons why I think Shedeur and the Saints could make some sense. Number 1, I think Derek Carr gets a little bit of a bad rap. I certainly still think he's a starter in this league. If they had cut him this offseason, teams would have been interested. The Steelers would have looked into it. The Giants would have looked into it. Derek Carr's a top 20-ish, top 25 quarterback. It's not like he's a bad player. But he is not the long-term answer in New Orleans. I think pretty much everyone could agree with that. If they were in a better cap situation and they could have cut him while becoming cap compliant this year, I think they would have did it, but they just couldn't afford to. So they restructured him, and they're going to roll with him for another year. But he's year to year at this point there. Unless he has an awesome year, most people believe that this is going to be his last in New Orleans. Kellen Moore coming in to become their head coach, if he kind of falls into their laps talking about Shedeur, he might want to go get his guy, right? Because let's be honest, this was a pretty unattractive job. No long-term quarterback on the roster, no clear path to getting one, not a great cap situation, some good players, not a great roster. But if a guy like Shedeur, who's not a perfect prospect, falls to 9, Kellen might say, hey, I don't know what next year's draft looks like. I don't know where we're going to be picking. This might be too good of an opportunity to pass up. And then more so from Shedeur's skill set standpoint, I like the fit in terms of it's a dome stadium, so you're playing in good conditions, warm weather division. You think about half the games at home, right? 8 or 9 games per year in a dome. Sweet. Another game at a dome every year in Atlanta. Carolina's a warm weather team. Tampa's a warm weather team, being the NFC South. So you're guaranteed at least 11 warm weather games, and odds are, especially if a couple of your early games in the schedule against northern teams are in September, those are going to be warm weather games too. So Shedeur Sanders, who has an average arm, is an average athlete. You ideally would not want him to go to a cold weather situation because as you get into December and January, his average arm strength may not be able to pierce the wind in the cold weather, all of that stuff. But if you're playing in the South, kind of like Tua in Miami, it's why we always talk about in December and January, if the Dolphins have to go on the road, they get into trouble. Kind of similar with Shedeur with his average physical traits. So I like the fit in New Orleans because you're going to be playing in good weather conditions for a vast majority of your games. I like Shedeur as a prospect. To me, this is a mid-late round 1 type of player that'll probably go higher because of quarterback tax and it not being a great QB draft. And if I'm the Saints, man, the more I really think about this, if he's there at 9, I'm heavily considering that if I'm New Orleans. I understand they've got holes on the roster, but again, there's no guarantee in the future. If you really like a quarterback and you don't have a long-term answer at quarterback on your team, I don't think it's ever a bad thing to take a swing at a guy. Like, it really not. It's one thing if they trade up a haul to go get him and it doesn't work out. But if he falls into your lap at 9, I wouldn't criticize that at all. In fact, I'd be like, that's a worthwhile swing for Kellen Moore and for the New Orleans Saints. They have not had a reliable QB situation since the end of, really since about 2 years before Breeze retired. It's very similar to the Steelers, right? They ran out the string a year or two too long with Big Ben. Same thing with Drew Brees when their arms were shot. And since then, they've been scrambling to try to find an answer. They tried Jameis Winston. They've brought in Derek Carr. That's not worked out that well. It's been fine, but they haven't won a ton. Shedeur Sanders, if you bring him in and he hits, he could be your guy long term. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar, but he's going to bring your team a lot of attention. You're going to be in the spotlight a lot, and he's got a chance to be a pretty good player, and you pair him with an offensive-minded coach in Kellen Moore. I think this is a pretty interesting thing that very well could develop over the next month or so leading up to the draft. So should the Saints draft Shedeur if he's there? If he's sitting there at 9, should they do it? Type Y for yes, or you can type in for no. Again, I'm heavily considering pulling that trigger if I'm Kellen and Mickey Loomis if Shedeur Sanders is sitting there at number 9. I promise you this, they're doing their homework on him. Okay, let's go from a guy entering the NFL to a guy that could be leaving it. Aaron Rodgers. Is he going to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers? Could he retire? Adam Schefter speculated earlier today that maybe Rodgers is just considering retiring, which is why he hasn't signed yet. This is what Schefter had to say, quote, "They both need each other," talking about Rodgers and the Steelers. That's if Rodgers wants to play, which I'm not convinced yet that he does. Until I hear him say, quote, "I want to play," close quote, then I can tell you people are asking that question about whether he wants to play. It's come up. I'm hearing he might not want to play, which, by the way, again, I don't want to speak for him because I don't want to get called out. We're speculating, but it shouldn't be that hard. And look, Aaron Rodgers said at the end of the regular season when he was asked about his future, I don't want to hold people up. I don't want to drag this thing out. I'm not going to say week 3 of free agency he's dragging it out, but to me, if he's not with the team by draft week, you're dragging it out. 2 weeks go by from here on out, that's a long time. The season ended in early January. We're 2.5 months past that. Do what you want, but you said you weren't going to drag this thing out. I'm not sure we're quite to that, but you're entering that territory. And look, with the Giants just saying, hey, we're just going to sign Russ. We're not waiting on this anymore. The Steelers are the only clear option right now. Tennessee has not expressed interest. Sure, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, was like, you can't completely shut a door. Feels like they're not going in that direction. It's Pittsburgh or it's, what are you going to do? So the longer Rodgers waits, the more speculation is going to circulate from everyone in the media. That's just how this thing works. So to me, Aaron Rodgers has 3 options. Number 1, and I still think the clear favorite here is just sign with the Steelers. It's not a great situation, but they have DK Metcalf. They have George Pickens. If they can add a good offensive lineman, I think that group can be decent. If they can run the football, which Mike Tomlin wants to do, okay, could they be what they've been recently, which is a 9-10 win team? Maybe Rodgers is good enough in a certain matchup to win a playoff game. Okay, it's not like the Jets. He'd be going to a competent organization. He could retire, which is what Adam Schefter is speculating. Hey, what's he waiting for? Maybe he's thinking about retiring. I mean, he said 2 years ago he was 90% retired, and he's played 2 years since. So, I'm sure it's at least under consideration. Although, it's been reported that he wanted to stay with the Jets for another year. He wanted to play next season, but they told him that's not going to happen. We're going to cut you, which is what they did. And then number 3, and this is the wild card. He could wait this thing out. Wait through the draft, get the training camps, see if an injury pops up. Hell, maybe even wait until early into the season before the trade deadline. See if a team that has a chance to contend loses their starter due to an injury, and maybe that team doesn't have a good backup option. Aaron Rodgers signs and tries to be the savior. The problem with that option is this. If he does that, if he takes that route, I'm not going to sign, I'm just going to train, wait this out, kind of Joe Flacco a couple years ago, but, higher level player, there's no guarantee. You don't know if a high-level starter is going to get hurt for a contender. You don't know if said team would even sign you if that scenario would pop up. In that situation, you're kind of soft retiring. You may not play again because if he doesn't play this year, is someone really going to sign him next year at 42 years old? Probably not. So if he wants to play, I think he's going to have to sign with the Steelers. Now, Speaking of which, there is another report out there from Tom Pelissero. He said earlier this week that Rodgers could sign within a couple of days. He also said that he's been in contact with Pittsburgh players. He's been talking to them. We know he had a 6-hour meeting in Pittsburgh, which apparently he initiated. The Steelers did not. So that shows you that he's been proactive. Now, look, maybe he went through that meeting and had mixed feelings. It sounded like it went well. That's what McAfee said, the one guy that's in his circle in the media. But, maybe he's just waiting this out a little bit longer. Maybe he wants to wait until the draft comes and goes because he doesn't want to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe they draft a quarterback. So I think the bottom line is until he signs with someone or announces his retirement, not many people really know what the hell is going on with Aaron Rodgers. That's just how he is. He's an enigma, right? That's the title of the documentary. We'll wait and see. If you're Pittsburgh, I've said for a while, it's like at some point you just got to have other options, but it's like, what are they going to do? Are they just going to force him to make a decision? I mean, they have Mason Rudolph in the 21st overall pick. They kind of have no choice but to wait this thing out at least until the draft. So going to be very interesting here. I still think, my gut still tells me he will sign with Pittsburgh, but until he does, the speculation firestorm is going to continue to circulate here as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. Predict it for us. What will Aaron Rodgers do? What do you guys think he's going to end up doing? I'll still say he signs with the Steelers, but until he does, it's hard to know what his decision will be. All right, guys, appreciate you for tuning in to today's show. My name is Harrison Graham. We will continue to monitor all of the top NFL storylines here on 4 Verts. So hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you guys soon.